keeping United States hood.
New Orleans, Louisiana, Carrollton, 17th Ward, Hollygrove. That's my hood. I came from there, and I promise you do not want to go there.
We're right here in Hollygrove, you know
Tell them
what I'm
where
saying?
we at right now.
Hollygrove, this way.
How the fuck y'all think Hollygrove wasn't on here?
Thursday morning, neighbors say two boys were out walking their dog on Live Oak Street in Hollygrove near the railroad tracks. They said the dog went into an abandoned house and brought out human bones.
Upon arriving at the scene, the officers reportedly found two people dead and two shot. The two shot were transported to an area hospital.
2 people are dead and 2 others wounded after a shooting in Hollygrove.
Also, the NOPD investigating an early afternoon shooting in Hollygrove.
Breaking news from Hollygrove. New Orleans police remain on the scene of a deadly shooting.
In late 2010, federal agents with the ATF will start an investigation into several acts of violence that had taken place in the Carrollton area of New Orleans. During the course of this investigation, the agents would review numerous police reports, 911 calls, recorded telephone calls, and speak to numerous cooperating witnesses, aka snitches. Based on this investigation, the agents would determine that Tyrone Stevenson, aka Duke, Carrie Jones, aka Bean, Theron Golston, aka Thema, Ryan Carroll, aka Ronnie Boo, Burnell Williams, aka Bussy, Walter Connolly, aka Ike Neasy, Norman Radcliffe, aka Turk, Mark Glenn, and China Stewart, aka Miss China, along with other known individuals, were members and associates of an organization engaged in, amongst other things, conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, the distribution of controlled substances, murder, conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and obstruction of justice in the Hollygrove area of the city of New Orleans, dating back as far as 2006.
In the 17th, if you see somebody else that ain't goons, they ain't goons. We the youngest goons out here, you understand? Yeah, and we holding this bitch down. You understand? The EBB, the goons, the OBC, you understand? Right here. You heard me? They yeah, man. I'm telling you. Hello?
I fuck with them dudes. I fuck with like my little homie Mac Man. I fuck with Lil Wayne.
Stay with that, man.
What Mac Man?
Them niggas, they Apple and that's good.
Yeah, we gonna see we hollering.
Let that bitch sit on the stand. I might need it. I might need it. Hey, the nigga, yeah, that's how we do it right here. Tripping that little fish fight. We let them hang. We let them hang. We ain't okay. Yeah, the people be swinging. We gotta put that on that low light.
Y'all seen it. Where we at? Palmer Hollygrove. You know.
New tonight at 10, a man is dead after a shooting in Hollygrove. Police say he was shot several times just before 8 tonight in the 3000 block of General Ogden. Call Crime Stoppers at 822-1111 if you have any further information on this murder.
Labeling these individuals as an organization, including identifying its leadership, membership, and associates, would constitute them as being a criminal enterprise. The members of the enterprise would possess, use, carry, and discharge numerous firearms in furtherance of their drug trafficking activities in an effort to protect their drug turf, to retaliate against other rival neighborhood drug gangs such as Hell City. And for the purpose of maintaining and increasing their position in the enterprise, agents would identify some of the members of Hell City as Brent Collins, Irvin McKenzie, Gavin Scott, and Jamal Garner. For several years, numerous shootings would take place between the two rival groups. In August of 2007, Ryan Carroll, aka Ronnie Boo, broke into a crib belonging to a hustler out the hood who was known as an associate of the Hell City gang. While in the crib, Ronnie Boo was hit for 7 racks, later being arrested but would eventually bond out. In an effort to get Dude to drop the charges, Ronnie Boo would have his uncle holler at Dude to squash the beef. On December 24th of 2007, after chopping it up with his uncle, Ronnie Boo would go holler at Dude about the home invasion. Ronnie Boo's homies, Tyrone Stevenson, Walter Conley, Norman Radcliffe, Carrie Jones, and Theron Golston would drop him off in the hood so that he could squash the beef with Dude. While they were back there, Duke, Ike Neasy, Turk, Bean, and Thema robbed the dice game in the 1700 block of Cambron Street. Before they went with the move on the dice game, Melvin Plummer, aka Tiger, would tell Duke and Bean that Dude put a bag on their heads after Ronnie Boo ran in his crib. One of the little dudes from Hell City got hit up while running from the scene as the dudes from Hell City were busting back, hitting Turk in the leg. Upon the NOPD making it to the scene, they will find 13 AK-47 casings which came from the cutter Bean was hitting with. Immediately after the act they pulled off, Duke, Ike Neasy, Turk, and Bean slid back to Hollygrove. When they pulled up, a cooperating witness would say that he saw them all with guns. Thema and Ike Neasy drove Turk to Ochsner, the closest hospital in the area. While he was at the hospital, the NOPD would attempt to interview Turk. When questioned, Turk would lie and say he was hit up on General Ogden and Olive. The mistake he made was telling the NOPD that Ike Neasy and Thema had driven him to the hospital. This would prompt them dicks to interview Ike Neasy, who would deny any knowledge of the shooting. Thema would leave the hospital before he could be interviewed. The NOPD would go to General Ogden and Olive to investigate Turk's story, finding no evidence of a shooting in the area. 2 days later, on December 26th of 2007, the NOPD would respond to a 911 call of a shooting that took place in the 8800 block of Olive Street. When officers arrived on the scene, they would find Ike Neasy suffering from a gunshot wound to the head. Ike Neasy was alert when questioned by the police, telling them that an unknown man driving a white SUV spent the bend and hit him up. Based on a follow-up investigation by the NOPD, it will be determined that this was a retaliatory shooting by members of Hell City for the shooting 2 days earlier at the dice game. During this investigation, the feds would locate a telephone call that was made on March 28th of 2009 by Ike Neasy from OPP. During the call, Ike Neasy would be on the phone with Jamal Garner, a member of Hell City, letting him know that he knew he shot him in the head in December of 2007. He would also threaten to retaliate. During the call, Ike Neasy would be heard bragging to others in the background about his intent to retaliate. The feds would use this phone call as additional proof of the war between Hell City and Hollygrove, which will continue for several years, and being an example of how the men will continue to commit crimes of violence in effort to maintain or increase their position in the streets. Based on information received from another snitch, we discovered that on December the 26th of 2007 at approximately 12 p.m., Duke, Bean, and Burnell Williams were passengers in a black four-door Pontiac Grand Prix driven by Duke when Duke was involved in a two-car accident. According to the snitch, Duke, Turk, and Burnell were on the West Bank when they received a telephone call informing them that Ike Neasy had been shot. Upon hearing the news, they all strapped up and got into the car with Duke, traveling from the West Bank to P-Town to retaliate against Hell City, who they believe were responsible for the shooting.
Also, the NOPD investigating an early afternoon shooting in Hollygrove.
While on the West Bank Expressway, they would get into an accident. The vehicle would catch on fire. They would all flee the scene, but were eventually apprehended by police. In extinguishing the fire department would find 3 firearms under the hood of the whip. Subsequent ballistics examinations will confirm that Noriko Magnani recovered from the scene of the accident with the firearm used during the shooting on December 24th of 2007. On July 9th of 2008, several of the men and their unindicted co-conspirators, including Duke, Ronnie Boo, Ike Neasy, Turk, and Bussy, got into a stolen white van with numerous firearms and drove through the hood, looking to retaliate against Hell City. Ronnie Boo was strapped with a handgun. Duke was strapped with a chopper. The other individuals inside the van would have several different types of firearms. As the van would approach, it would slow down. Several individuals in the van would start letting off. More than 25 shots were fired from the van from 5 different heaters that were used in the drive-by, including an AK-47, a 9, a 45, a 40, and a 223 assault rifle. One of the dudes from Hell City had just exited his car and was walking to his partner's crib at the 1726 Monroe Street address, and the shots were fired. He would run into the alley next to the crib, realizing that he had been hit in the leg. Several cars that were parked on the street and other cribs on the block were also hit by the gunfire. As the van would speed away, one of them dicks happened to be driving by and witnessed the shooting. He would turn around and chase the van as it fled towards the river. The van would come to a stop at the intersection of Joliet and Lee Streets. Everyone would jump out, fleeing on foot into the neighborhood. The NOPD officer would walk down on the van and observe several guns and shell casings inside of the van. The NOPD would set up a perimeter around the hood and conduct a search. Tyrone Stevenson, aka Duke, Ryan Carroll, aka Ronnie Boo, and Burnell Williams, aka Bussy, would be apprehended, hiding under different houses in the hood. The other individuals in the van at the time of the shooting were able to duck them dicks. After apprehending Duke, Ronnie Boo, and Bussy, Duke from Hell City was transported to the hospital so that he could be treated for his injuries. When questioned by them dicks, he would not identify the shooters and was uncooperative with the police investigation. During a follow-up investigation into the shooting, the ATF would obtain recorded telephone conversations from the men while they were in jail. Based on these phone calls, agents were able to determine Turk and Igneezy were also in the van the day of the shooting. Since neither Turk nor Igneezy were arrested by the police that day, Duke, Ronnie Boo, and Bussy will call them from the jailhouse numerous times. During the calls, they would all brag about their roles in the shooting. Bussy would call Turk and Igneezy on several occasions. Unaware that the calls were being recorded, they talked about the incident and how Bussy was hiding under a house trying to escape from them dicks. Igneezy and Turk would run it about how they were also hiding under a house and stayed there all night until the dicks left the area. Igneezy and Turk would also tell Bussy that they were going to finish the job when everyone was back on the streets. In a call made on July 11th of 2008 at 10:16 a.m., Bussy would hit Turk's line, telling him that the police who arrested them referred to them as New Orleans' most wanted, claiming that with them in jail, Hollygrove would be dead, meaning there would be no more crime and police would no longer have to work the area. They would both bust out laughing, saying, "Y'all just don't know. We about to cause ruckus around that bitch." The feds will use this call as an example of how they bragged about their criminal conduct in an effort to maintain their position in the streets. Bussy would run it with Igneezy about still having 2 guns, a cutter and a 40. The men would go on to chop it up about getting 4 more heaters and getting their money up. Ronnie Boo would also call Turk and Igneezy on several occasions. Ronnie Boo was tripping, saying way too much on the jailhouse phone like the rest of the men had done themselves. His big mistake would be admitting that he had a gun in the van that his prints might be found on, claiming that he did not fire, but the weapon may have his prints. In another call, Turk would ask if Ronnie Boo used his ratchet during the shooting. Thinking that he was being smart, Ronnie Boo would also talk about coming up with an alibi, suggesting talking to some broads out the hood who have an excuse for being in the area at the time of the shooting. Ronnie Boo would also discuss how Duke had gotten grazed by one of the bullets during the drive-by. During the ATF follow-up investigation, the feds would also locate several recorded telephone calls that had taken place between September 9th of 2008 and September 14th of 2008. During the call that was recorded on September the 9th at 7:42 p.m., Duke would hit Turk's line and talk to Bean. During that conversation, they would talk about guns and how Arthur Harris, aka Black, was able to get the gat for them. In another call, which was recorded on September 10th of 2008 at 8:09 p.m., Duke hit up Turk and talked about the whole group. On September 14th of 2008 at 4:15 p.m., Duke would hit Miss China and get a three-way to chop it up with Bean. During the call, Bean would tell Duke how he had been pumping all day and bringing money to Miss China. He also would speak on a recent September 14th of 2008 shooting in Jefferson Parish that they were all a part of. In a call with his old lady, Duke would talk about how Miss China was putting work in everyone's hand, aka that hard. September 13th of 2008 at approximately 10:30 p.m., the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Department will respond to an aggravated battery by way of shooting at 2333 Alex Corman Drive in Harvey, Louisiana. At the time of the incident, Ike Neasy was living with his mother at 2321 Alex Corman Drive. Through a follow-up investigation, the ATF were able to pull telephone calls from the Orleans Parish Prison where Duke would hit Turk's line. They would chop it up about what went down. According to a snitch, Bean and Thema bought some heat to Turk a Mac 90. After initially being unable to locate his ops, Turk would later go back outside with Thema where they would spot the ops.
They are looking for suspects responsible for shooting and killing a man. Deputies say they found a man dead around 10:30 last night on Jules Avenue. They're still working to figure out a motive.
Immediately after hitting up their ops, before them dicks could show up, them boys slid back to Hollygrove. On September the 14th of 2008, the NOPD will respond to the shooting of Paul May, who would later die from his injuries. While on the scene, the NOPD will be approached by witnesses telling them that the shooter had fled to 3526 Hollygrove Street, Ronnie Boo's crib, which is located within a half block from the murder scene. Junkies on the block was lacing them dicks, informing them that the heaters were kept under the house. During the search of the crib, they would allegedly find rounds of ammunition and paraphernalia. In securing the rear yard of the house, officers would unexpectedly bump into Ike Neasy, who was blowing a guard. They would hack him up, finding a 9 and a tech on the ground in the alley. As they were walking Ike Neasy out of the alley, unidentified witnesses would allegedly point him out as the shooter. Looking under the house, they would find buku firepower. They would later obtain a search warrant. The following tools were recovered: a Mac 90, a 223, a 45, an AR, a 9 along with magazines and ammunition. Arthur Harris, aka Black, was in the crib with Bean when them dicks pulled up. Both will be placed under arrest for illegal possession of firearms and drug paraphernalia. An unidentified witness stated at the time of the shooting, Ike Neasy, Black, and Bean were walking from a local bar in Hollygrove when they walked down on Paul May. After getting into it with Paul May over some shit about that hard, Ike Neasy would allegedly up a 45 and down Paul. The 45 that was located under the house was matched by the crime lab to the cases at the scene of the murder of Paul May. Ronnie Boo would hit his people line from OPP, asking her did them dicks do anything else. Recanted the night of the shooting, she would admit to seeing Ike Neasy shoot Paul May, describing the shooting in detail down to how Paul May screamed after each shot. In another call, she would express her concern for the NOPD trying to put all the charges on Bean. On February 2nd, 2009, the NOPD will respond to the intersection of General Ogden and Olive Streets after receiving reports of shots being fired. When they arrived, they recovered 5 .40 caliber cases in the 8800 block of Olive Street. Somebody on the scene told them that Walter Conley was the victim and that he was at Ochsner Hospital. During the questioning, Ike Neasy told the NOPD that when he was leaving the store at 8841 Olive Street, he heard the shots and ran, going on to say that he never saw the shooters, nor did he know who the target was. The NOPD would receive info from people on the scene that identified Bussy, Ike Neasy, and Turk as all being on the set prior to the shooting when dudes from Hell City spent in a red Dodge Charger. At the time, Duke had left to cop the green. While all of this was going down, the dudes in the Charger started hitting at Duke as they passed him driving up the street. On February the 8th of 2009, at approximately 1:30 a.m., the NOPD will pull up on the 9300 block of Apricot Street after receiving reports of shots being fired. Officers recovered 10 9mm spent casings and 2 .40 caliber casings. Officers were also informed that the victim had been taken to Ochsner Hospital. The victim was interviewed. Neither she nor the others in the whip would identify the shooters. On February 13th of 2009, the NOPD pulled up to the 8800 block of Olive Street after receiving reports of shots being fired. When they arrived at the location, they recovered 25 9mm casings and 16 .40 caliber casings. There were no victims or witnesses located on the scene. The only damage was the parked car that had been hit up. Through a subsequent investigation, it was learned that Duke, Bean, Ike Neasy, and Turk were in the 8800 block of Olive Street when the dudes from Hell City pulled up in the red Pontiac Sunfire, letting off shots. Duke, Bean, and Ike Neasy started hitting back. On February the 13th of 2009, sometime prior to 9:30 p.m., the NOPD would allegedly receive information from someone out the hood, identifying Duke and Ike as the perpetrators of a number of shootings that had recently happened in Hollygrove. The caller would state that Duke and Turk were driving around the area in a maroon Ford Expedition with a paper tag. The NOPD located the vehicle, attempting to pull it over on Carrollton Avenue. Duke would jump out and break out running. Officers would give chase, allegedly observing him throw a Glock 40 to the sidewalk. Under the front of the passenger seat of the vehicle where Turk had been seated, officers would recover 2 additional handguns, a 9 and a 40. Bussy had driven the vehicle, which was also occupied by Ike Neasy as a second rear passenger. Ballistic examinations would identify that the 340 caliber casings recovered from the February 2nd, 2009 incident, 140 caliber casing recovered from the February 8, 2009 incident, and 5 40 caliber casings from the February 13, 2009 accident were all determined to have been fired from the same weapon, specifically identified as the 40 recovered from under the passenger seat of the vehicle when they were stopped on February of 2009. Additionally, 240 caliber casings recovered from the February 2nd of 2009 incident, 140 caliber casing recovered from the February 8th of 2009 incident, 11 casings recovered from the February 13th, 2009 incident were determined to have been fired from the same weapon, specifically identified as the Glock 23, the 40 caliber that was possessed by Duke, and the 40 caliber that was possessed by Duke on the evening of February 13th of 2009. On March 17th of 2009, at approximately 8:48 p.m., 2 dudes from Hell City were sitting on the porch of 1726 Monroe Street when a white Ford pickup truck traveling southbound on Monroe would open fire from the front passenger window. When police arrived, one of them was found in the middle of the street, while the other was located in the alley next to 1726 Monroe. Officers later learned that another victim, an 8-year-old boy, had been taken to the hospital by his mother. All 3 had sustained gunshot wounds and were treated and later released from the hospital.
Information tonight in a shooting that injured an 8-year-old boy in Hollygrove. Police tell us they're now investigating it.
One of the dudes was shot in both the arm and the foot, while the other was hit in the leg. Officers recovered both 40 caliber and 9mm casings from the scene. No arrests were made. It wouldn't be long before ATF agents would receive information from a snitch who stated that Bean and Jefferson Parish were together at Jefferson's crib when Duke and Bussy arrived in a white Ford pickup truck. Duke and Bussy would tell Bean and Jefferson that they were about to go looking for the Hell City dudes. During the follow-up investigation of this incident, ATF agents were able to locate numerous recorded telephone calls regarding this incident where the men would admit to their involvement in the shooting. A ballistic examination would identify that the 40 caliber casings recovered during the investigation into the earlier shooting were fired from a Desert Eagle, which was recovered in May of 2009 during the execution of a search warrant. On a call from OPP, Bussy would chop it up with Ike Neasy about how they was making them boys in Hollygrove pay draft on a regular basis. On April 6th of 2009, at approximately 10 p.m., NOPD officers would see 3 individuals standing next to a maroon Hyundai SUV parked in the 2100 block of Phillip Street. They would observe Bussy quickly enter and exit the vehicle. As with time, the interior of the car would burst into flames. As the officers approached, they would break out running. Bussy and Ike were later apprehended by the officers, while Bean would get away. On April 10th of 2009, it is alleged that Duke, Thema, and Turk went to Bean's crib asking if he wanted to roll with them to get at the Hell City dudes. Bean, who had messed his ankle up running from them dicks the day prior, wouldn't go. Later that morning, police would respond to a call in the 1700 block up Monroe Street, where they would find one of the Hell City dudes suffering from multiple gunshot wounds. Evidence recovered from the scene would identify 17 cases from a chopper and 13 casings from a 9. Ballistics examination will further identify that all 17 chopper casings were fired from the same weapon, and the 13 9 casings were fired from 3 different 9s. Later that day, the men would brag about how they had hit up Glenn Butler, which is one of the Hell City dudes. April 11th of 2009, the NOPD would dispatch to investigate a call of shots fired in the 700 block of North Prairie Street. When officers would arrive, they observed several bullet casings on the ground in the 700 block of North Prairie, a bloodstain, and a Smith & Wesson 9. The officers would then check University Hospital for potential victims, locating Turk and DJ along with 2 other victims. The 4 victims told police while in the 700 block of North Prairie, they were walked down on by a dude with dreads who started busting in the crowd. Subsequent investigation by the ATF would determine Bean, Duke, and Mark Glenn also present at the time of the shooting. Officers would collect a total of 13 9mm casings as well as the Smith & Wesson 9, loaded with a total of 16 live rounds from the scene. The NOPD would also follow a blood trail to the steps of 2020 Dumaine Street. After a search, they will find a cutter inside of the home. At the time of the incident, Turk was living with his mom at 2020 Dumaine Street. A ballistics comparison positively identified both the Smith & Wesson as well as the chopper as 2 of the firearms that were used the day before on April 10th of 2009 in the shooting of Glenn Butler. On June 14th of 2010, NOPD officers responded to a homicide at 8921 Birch Street, which is the residence of Glenn Butler. Upon arrival, officers would find Miss Eula Mae Ivy lying in the front yard deceased as a result of multiple gunshot wounds. The second victim, Jonathan Butler, Glenn Butler's younger brother, was struck by a bullet that entered the crib. Witnesses to the incident told the police that Miss Ivy was killed by several individuals who drove past the location and opened fire from 2 vehicles. During the shooting, one of the cars crashed. The shooter jumped out and continued to fire his weapon. After both vehicles sped away from the 8900 block of Birch Street, they would both drive down Hollygrove westbound onto the 9000 block of Hickory Street. Somebody out there, Lil Click, had to be snitching because, according to a confidential source, following the shooting of Miss Ivy, Bean, Turk, and Thema ran the ep how Thema had gotten out of the whip and kept busing. Approximately 1 week after the murder of Miss Ivy, a cooperating witness was at the Orleans Parish Criminal District Court along with Thema and other individuals, both known and unknown to the cooperating witnesses. When given the opportunity, the CW specifically questioned Thema about his involvement in the murder. Thema would allegedly admit to participating in the murder of Miss Ivy. On August 31st of 2010, the NOPD would observe Thema walking toward the front passenger door of a parked 4-door gray Altima. They watched as Thema removed a handgun from his waistband and opened the door. Upon seeing the police, Thema attempted to reconceal the weapon, entering the car, placing the gun on the floorboard. As the officers approached, Jonell Duncan exited a nearby convenience store and walked toward the vehicle. When the officers reached the vehicle, they could see the gun lying on the floor of the car. The officers retrieved a .45 from the whip. After being arrested, Thema would allegedly give a statement to the NOPD admitting to possessing the .45. Thema told the police that he found the gun near the intersection of General Ogden and Olive Streets in Hollygrove a few days prior to his arrest. However, the CW would testify that Thema admitted to the firearm being the one used when Miss Ivy was slain. In November of 2012, a federal grand jury will return a 34-count second superseding indictment charging Walter Conley, Tyrone Stevenson, Theron Golston, Burnell Williams, Norman Ratcliffe, and Mark Glenn for participating in a RICO conspiracy, drug conspiracy, and several substantive acts of violence. Darren Golston pleaded guilty to a life sentence for his participation in the murder of Miss Eula Mae Ivy. Jones pleaded guilty to a life sentence for his participation in the RICO conspiracy, 2 separate non-fatal shootings, and for his participation in the murder of Miss Eula Mae Ivy. Burnell Williams pleaded guilty to participating in the RICO conspiracy, drug conspiracy, gun conspiracy, and to his involvement in 2 separate non-fatal shootings. He was sentenced to serve 240 months in federal prison. Ryan Carroll pleaded guilty to participating in the RICO conspiracy and to discharging a firearm during a drug trafficking crime and a crime of violence. He was sentenced to serve 210 months in federal prison. Walter Conley, aka Ike Neasy, was sentenced to serve 480 months in prison, 40 years. Tyrone Stevenson and Mark Glenn also pled guilty to various charges in the indictment, which included non-fatal shootings, and were sentenced to serve 360 months and 300 months in prison.